Andy Kane here, and welcome to another episode of Buy Like a Guy, the podcast for men about buying cool things like bourbons, beers, watches, and more from experts who know their shit. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about watches and what you should know if you're looking for a quote-unquote good watch. I mean, what are the basics of buying a nice watch? What's the appeal of owning or collecting fine watches? What about the different kinds of movements? And ultimately, what should you look for when you're shopping for a fine quality watch? Well, I know a guy who knows watches, and he's my guest today. His name is Tim Jackson, and he's the owner of Independent in Time, a company he founded that deals exclusively with watches that are made by independent watchmakers from around the world. He's been in the fine watch business for well over 30 years. He's a watch fanatic, and he's also an expert, and he's going to answer those questions and a bunch more, and he'll do so in a delightfully English way. Welcome to Buy Like a Guy. By the way, if you have a suggestion about a subject that needs addressing and you need a guy, I'll let you know what to do at the end of the episode. So you're the owner and founder of Independent in Time, and you focus on independent watchmakers from around the world and the timepieces that they create. I want to take it more from the very basics of people who want to find a quote-unquote nice watch. Could be a luxury watch. I don't know. So I want to start there.
What I've experienced is that it predominantly tends to be guys. And if they've never bought a watch, which a lot of young guys have never bought a watch before, it wasn't traditionally, they're not now being given them for, let's say, graduation gifts or those sort of type of things. It's very often a self-purchase, and that comes with quite a lot of trepidation, especially if you start looking at the prices of some of the watches today. These can be in the multiples of thousands of dollars. So that comes with some anxiety. And am I buying the right thing? Should I be buying this? What's my friend buying?
So when you started, have you always loved watches, or did you discover you loved watches?
No, I was given my first watch was a Timex way back. My parents gave it to me probably for Christmas or birthday. I'm going to say in age, goodness me, 7 or 8 maybe. And it was a steel little, what might be termed as a dive watch today. I'm sure I would not have taken it anywhere near water, but it had a little bezel that turned, plastic bezel. That's the part around the outside of a watch that divers use to basically measure elapsed time. And it had luminous numbers. So I used to charge it up with my torch or flashlight, as you say over here, and go under my covers and look at it and be geeked out by that. So yeah, I've been into watches, you could say, for a while. And then my next watch was a gift. It was a quartz watch, which is more of a grown-up watch, if you will. It was given to me by my parents. I had a metal bracelet, and it was a little bit more of a dressier watch. It still had hands and told the time. It wasn't a digital watch with those red numbers, which came out in the 70s.
So from the get-go, when you got your first watch from your parents, you were into it.
Yeah, but I didn't know really why. I just was mechanical things. I had trains as a kid. I had a model train set as a kid. I liked mechanical things, and I didn't have a clue what was inside it back then. Just that it was this little machine on my wrist that was mechanical that told time.
So I wonder what the appeal is now. Again, I'm seeing younger, typically, like you said, guys, they reach a certain age where, you know what, I want to get a good watch. I wonder what that comes from. I support it. I think it's great. I'm not a watch guy per se, but I'm, as of late, and my dad was a watchmaker, by the way. So he was he was a legit watchmaker. Maybe I didn't appreciate him the way I should have because I was just brought up with them. But as of late, since he's passed away, I've become more enamored with watches. And I don't even know how they work. I don't know. I can't quite describe why I think they're so cool.
One of the things that I've come to look at over the years, and I've been buying and selling watches now for 30 years. Big reason why people buy a watch is not to tell the time. And that may seem silly because they were originally designed to tell time. And that's why watchmakers basically took a pocket watch, which is what preceded wristwatches. And somebody decided, well, maybe we can strap a watch on somebody's wrist and you can actually look at the watch without having to, or tell the time, without having to pull the pocket watch out of this waistcoat pocket. Now we have cell phones. They keep better time. They will always keep better time than a mechanical watch because it's pure physics. But without going way out there, what is time? We're on this earth X number of days, hours, minutes, months, years. And the passage of time is something that particularly as you get older, you perhaps start to think about it a little bit more. And man's measurement, if you will, and that's where horology comes from, the measurement of time. It's been around forever. The Chinese started with water clocks, and we've been fascinated with it. As you go through history, the measurement of time was really important strategically, things like that. So I think as human beings, we enjoy measuring time and having a machine, a little machine on your wrist that represents that, and you can glance at it. You don't have to pull your phone out of your pocket to see time.
Yeah, that can become such an awesomely deep subject.
Mm.
Wristwatches also certainly are a communication device as far as one's style, maybe how you're.
There is that.
So I think that's a very legit reason to get a watch that you feel cool wearing. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's not even superficial. It's a great communicator about how you might view yourself or want to view yourself or project yourself. And that, I think there again, is part of the appeal to me as someone who doesn't know a ton about watches, but I'm learning every day obviously through people like you. So that is, again, I was on your Instagram page. Those watches are amazing. Those timepieces.
Yeah, people talk about doing a deep dive on a subject. And that's really been my world professionally, certainly for the last probably 20 years. I started shallow dive, if you will, with one of the first of these, what I term artisanal independent watchmakers. And at the time, I was representing many of the well-known, storied Swiss and latterly German watch brands that have been around, some for 100, 150 years. They make great watches, but I came across this one guy, and he was making these watches, which I liked the look of. They appealed to me. And then I found what he was doing and why he was doing it, how he was doing it. And that was intriguing. I have a watch of his to this day. When I wear one of those watches, what does it, to your point, what does it say about me? Am I communicating to fellow watch nerds, if you will, watch geeks, that I've got one of this guy's watches and he didn't make a lot of watches? Is it a style thing? It's got Roman numerals. That's my sort of traditional classic heritage, if you will, growing up in the UK and having a grandfather clock ticking away in a friend's house. My dad didn't give a crap about watches. A shame, but hey, that's the way it was. We didn't have clocks in the house. He wore an inexpensive, I call £50 or less, battery-operated Casio dress watch, gold-plated.
Just to tell the time. That was it.
Yeah, just to tell the time. It was functional. The battery ran out. He probably tossed the thing and went and bought another one, which is silly. Or maybe he got a battery put in it. And it wasn't until an anniversary, latterly, probably their 40th wedding anniversary, that my mum decided he probably ought to have a real watch. And so he got a real watch. And actually, He was tickled pink by it. And one of the reasons was when he went to his lunch club with his buddies in Liverpool, one of his friends, who's an absolute watch geek and very knowledgeable about watches, I think he has quite a collection, made a comment about his watch. It was the first time in his life. And all of a sudden, my dad was like, oh, wow, this is cool. There was an interesting conversation that was had over the watchmaker. And not that my dad knew anything about the company. The company was Zenith. And this fellow was intrigued and said, yeah, that's a lovely watch. Zenith's been around for 100 plus years, and they're a great Swiss company, blah, blah, blah. And my dad was just like, wow, there's a whole new world. And it just didn't even occur to him. So people ask, why do you buy watches? Why do people spend so much money on watches at times? I suppose it's like anything. It could be cars, it could be
vinyl, shoes.
Sure.
Why do people spend so much money on freaking shoes?
I don't get it, but hey, that's not for me to judge. I know that I could easily be judged for the watches in my watch collection. But
I'm a big judger. I judge people a lot, so I'm judging you hard right now.
And I've certainly been the CEO of Judging Inc. many times, trying to back that one down and be less.
Sometimes they're observations. I maintain sometimes they're just observations, but different subject, different show.
Yeah, I think for somebody that's just getting going, what I tell them is ultimately, whatever your budget, that's a personal thing. There's no right or wrong. Certain watches are going to cost more, and these are the reasons why. And I will explain to people what goes into a watch that causes a price to be $500 versus 5,000, 50,000, 500,000, if you will. And most people looking to buy a watch, maybe they've put a couple of grand together, and they're like, I want to buy a nice watch, what they term as a nice watch, or a watch that's not what I might term a throwaway watch. There's a
Right.
lot of watches made very inexpensively. And look, this is the majority of watches made and sold in that category. They're not quality products.
That's a great thing to bring up, the term quality. So again, starting out, what does somebody look for to determine if it's a quality watch or not? To some degree, the price is a help, an indicator. It's not just rip off because they're expensive, and I can tell time on one that costs $150 and you just spent $5,000. What are the quality indicators that a newbie would just look at and go, okay, this tells me this is a nice piece? I mean, that's a huge, I know.
That's almost impossible.
It's an impossibility.
The good news is there's an awful lot of information available now to consumers that there wasn't 20 years ago. Now, having said that, that also comes with a caveat. There's almost too much information. So how do you differentiate all this stuff that's being fed to you? Let's say if you go online, you go on Instagram, there's an awful lot of information being pushed to you that isn't necessarily correct, accurate. So ultimately, maybe this may sound self-serving, but if you're looking to spend a few $1,000s, do a little bit of research online to get a sense of your style, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it costs or the features and the functions, but if you don't like the way it looks, you're probably not going to wear it, and then it's a waste of money. So get a sense of your style, and everybody has different style. There's watches for every different taste around. There really are. Even in the sort of niche world that I spend most of my time in with these watchmakers, you've got really classical looking watches, and you've got incredibly avant-garde watches, and sort of everything in between. Bright colors or very plain classic white dial with black numbers.
But that is probably the best starting point of all, isn't it? And it's super useful. It's a great point. Seems so simple. I like the diver look. There's where I'm starting.
Yep. And you can
from there.
Yeah, you can go there. That's a big genre. It's very popular, particularly in the last 20 years. And they use the term tool watch. And where that comes from is literally these watches originally when they were designed, and the classic is the Rolex Submariner, that was a tool watch. It was a tool for a diver, for a deep compression diver. It had the water resistant rating way beyond anybody's going to go swimming or snorkeling or even recreationally diving in Hawaii or something, or wherever in the Caribbean if you're on the East Coast. These watches were used by professionals, whether they were professional deep divers, whether they were military guys. Here in this area, a lot of the special forces used a Rolex. It was a solid built watch that also worked well because it had the guts from Rolex, which, that company had been in business for the time when they started making those watches, probably 40 years, I think, if my history is correct. So that had given them the ramp to really fine-tune their ability to make a mechanical movement. These watches were self-wind, actually, as well. So mechanical means it's got wheels and gears, but this was a self-winding or an automatic watch. So the movement of your wrist wound that watch.
So not to cut you off, and we are going to continue this, but I'm also noticing a lot of people don't know about self-winding watches. So can we just really quickly go through the types of movements, which are the guts of the watch?
Yeah, no, and I realized as soon as I started talking about that, I'm probably going to have to clarify this. The original watches, pocket watches, these were mechanical, and mechanical mean they have wheels and springs, and a spring basically that had the power that you wound it every morning, if you will, and you wound up a spring, and that tension that was held in that spring powered the watch throughout the day. Then some watchmakers figured out maybe we can get a system where we can actually power that spring by the movement of your wrist. And so they put a rotor and it span around, and with a gearing system that was actually able to wind the spring, the movement of your wrist. Now, if you sit at a desk all day and you just sit there and don't move your hands, you're not going to wind your watch. But most people, if they're up and about, will wind a watch. That's an automatic or a self-winding watch. They've got that system down to a very efficient system at this point. So most sport watches, if we talk about the diver watch, most of those are going to be an automatic watch. So then fast forward to the 70s when the quartz revolution kicked in. And what occurred was some very clever scientists figure out if you run, I'm not going to get too technical, but if you run electricity through a piece of quartz, it vibrates at a given number of vibrations per second. And it's just a property, it's a natural property of quartz. So knowing that number, they could then, with mathematics and physics, gear it down to have an accurate timekeeper. And so that's a quartz watch or a battery watch, if you will. So they needed power, so they put a battery in it. So a battery powers that, and you get this time signal, if you will, from a piece of quartz that is accurate. And all of a sudden, you didn't need all these wheels and gears. You just had this little printed circuit board in effect. And and that's the Japanese and the Swiss worked at it both at the same time. And that's the majority of watches today. And they keep very good time. Some of them keep insanely good time to within a second or two a month.
So you can't do a blanket statement about this, but if there's less moving parts in that watch, are those cheaper to make?
Yes.
Is that why the price just down?
Yeah, and there's a few moving parts, but it's minimal. And that can be mass produced. Whereas a mechanical watch, although, as I say, this Swatch Group has figured out how to have a watch made by a robot, in effect.
Oh, great.
Touches, but it's that's a different story. But most of the watches that are mechanical, that are, let's say, a dive watch, going back to the genre, there are companies now that have specialized in making movements in Switzerland and also in Japan and latterly in China as well, certainly in Germany. But traditionally, the Swiss have been known as the watchmakers of the world, and they just positioned themselves quite cleverly around just before World War II to be that, to take over that industry, in effect. We had lots of great watchmaking in the US. The war effort changed that, and it never recovered. So these watches have wheels and pinions and springs. The system that tells the time isn't ancient. It's a couple of 100-year-old system. They haven't really changed it. That requires people to put them together. And so there's a number of parts, and then there's the sort of human part about putting them together.
Some of these more popular brand name watches, I'll just say it, Rolex, Tag, those tend to be where a lot of people want to start because they've heard of it, right? And I'm going to go look at a Rolex and they're like, holy shit, like
Omega,
$8,000. Omega is a great watch, absolutely. Those are partly because of the lineage of the watches, I think, or the reputation of the watchmakers.
Marketing
for sure, which I'm cool with it. I'm cool for sure. Look, we were talking before about watches used to be just to keep time, right?
Yeah.
Cars used to just be to get from point A to point B, but Jesus, look at some of the cars now and you're like, my God, that's 100, 150 grand.
Yep.
So it's such a style thing going on there, performance and all these other things. That's, again, too deep of a subject for this. But I guess what I'm wondering is the human element, the craftsmanship, quote unquote, is still very much a part of building those watches, correct?
It's
till the robots just showed up, which thanks.
I don't want to ruin everybody's idea of the guy sitting in a little chalet in Switzerland in the snow in the winter putting watches together.
I thought they were gnomes. No,
no. But there are a few guys like that. But that area of the watchmaking world is really at the top end. So what you have today is you have these very well-oiled machines, if you will, or factories or manufactories.
Yes.
Where the ability for a Rolex or Omega or Tag to, design a watch from start to finish and have it built or build it themselves, that's where we're at today. And there are people who work in these factories who, are very highly skilled, and they do the same type of thing each day. And Rolex, to give a sense of reality, I think that helps. They make about a million watches a year, million one. Nobody knows exactly. Tag's probably making 300,000 to 400,000, maybe a little bit more than that. Omega's again 500,000-600,000. So these watches are, I wouldn't say they're mass produced, but they're made in a pretty efficient way to get that level of. And then the thing that I always find interesting, and having talked to a lot of these more on the specialist artisanal watchmakers, to every single one of them is in awe, if you will, of how a company like Rolex can produce 1 million watches a year and have them all be pretty damn accurate to within their quote unquote chronometer ratings, or as I like to say, within government guidelines. It's within 10 seconds a day. And when you think of all those little parts running 24/7, to have that accuracy is pretty remarkable. And consistently to do it over 1 million watches all these watchmakers are like, wow, that's impressive, because the level of precision one has to have in order to replicate that over that number of pieces is not easy to do. But these guys have figured out how to do it.
The idea of 1 million watches a year at first pass would be like, oh, geez, they're pumping them out. But I think like you and I both would agree that you're talking about the precision, the tools, the facilities,
Yeah.
the consistency, all that stuff costs money. And to stay true to that while they're doing it year after year is really a testament to. So again, it's bigger than it's not the little person in the chalet,
Right.
but there's still this really great commitment to, in the way I see it, to maintaining the integrity of the product every single time. Like zero question, it's going to be what a Rolex is supposed to deliver.
Yeah, and those are the successful brands. There are brands that haven't focused on that, and don't need to go into those. Those are the ones that typically disappear. But that's one of the strongest suits, if you will, of Rolex is their R&D department is consistently looking at ways how to improve the mechanics of the watch, the aesthetic part, the outside, the look of the watch. That's pretty much stayed fairly consistent, actually. And that's part of their brand value and the strength of their brand.
Yeah,
it's recognizable.
absolutely.
They haven't really changed the look. They tweak it a little bit. But on the inside of the watch, the movements they're making today are vastly improved over what they used to produce. And that's because of technology and metal sciences. They understand metals better. There's a big push, certainly in current times with cell phones and computers, which all have magnets in them, to have an anti-magnetic springs and parts of watches, because that was always a problem with mechanical watches. If you got them magnetized, all of a sudden, those little springs, they don't work. And then the watch doesn't work. And that's no good. So that's been a big push. And silicon has been brought into this world because obviously that doesn't get affected by magnets. And so that's been a big shift and an improvement for consumers.
Thanks so much to Tim Jackson for coming on the show, and good news, he'll be back for the next episode to enlighten us even more about the wide, wide world of watches. I put his contact information in the show notes below if you'd like to know more about him or his business. Also, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the Buy Like a Guy podcast with your buddies. They'll thank you. Now, if you need expert advice about something you don't know much about and you want a little guidance, send me an email at andy@buylikeaguy.com and I'll do my best to cover it in an upcoming show. And if you're that guy, a guy or girl people should hear from because you know your shit about a certain subject, please reach out to me and let's talk about how we can work together to make this world a better place. Until next time, thanks for listening to Buy Like a Guy.
Well, it was fate, so you'd say we were saved in his name. What a shame, we little games. Can't disbelieve what a fate that you were saved. All the hearts and offerings, all the lives that you gave. I can't disbelieve it. And you threw it all away. You threw it all away.